Hello, I'm Michael Redmond, professional 9-dan Go player. In this video, I will look at a game between Nakamura Dōseki and Yasui Santetsu. I'm showing a position here where black has just played in the middle of the side. So this looks a bit strange at first. And I can tell you that modern Go opening theory says that black should have played in an open corner. It's not as if they didn't know that already. So in the commentary, I'll be talking about why he might have played this move and how it affects both the top right and the lower right corners. So, at the dawn of the golden era of Go, there were 4 leading Go players who were sponsored by the shogunate. So they were associated with the 4 Iemoto schools of Go. Rigen and Honinbō Sansa were featured in a previous video, for which there will be a link in the video description. So Rigen founded the Hayashi school, and Sansa founded the Honinbō school. This video shows the other 2 players, Nakamura Dōseki and Yasui Santetsu. Both players were said to be disciples of Honinbō Sansa, who was the first Meijin. Doseki became Meijin when Sansa retired in 1623, so that was shortly before this game. Before Doseki died in 1630, he petitioned for his student Inoue Genkaku Inseki to be sponsored. So thereby he founded the Inoue school. Doseki's playing style was similar to Sansa in that it was positional and it focused on fast development. Yasui Santetsu founded the Yasui school, and he had an intense fighting style. So Doseki was said to remark, "Even when I win against Santetsu, I feel like my life was in danger." So that's a rough translation. But he was a very scary player, and he experimented in the opening too, sometimes giving the sides priority over the corners. So we're seeing a bit of that in this game too. Doseki and Santetsu reportedly played over 100 games, and about 40 game records are remaining. Their games feature relentless fighting and precise calculation. So at the time of this game, Doseki is already the Meijin. He was the second Meijin. Yasui Santetsu was probably a 7-dan. And this was a bit unusual maybe, but it did affect both corners. So for instance, a move that was very popular then and is still popular now would be white pressing here. But with a stone on the side, black is prepared to push through and cut. So black will push through and cut here. And the stone at R10 is going to be very useful in the fight that could develop here. So white's not going to be able to play any aggressive moves such as this one. White would have to find something a bit more passive. So the most white could hope to get into the black area would be something like this. And similarly, it affects what happens in the lower right corner, because when you press with a move like white 1 here, you always have to consider the possibility of black pushing through it too. And black does also. So if white were to play away here and black would press here, in this case also black does have to consider the possibility of white pushing through and cutting. And in this case, black stone on the side is going to make the fight good for black. So in a position, so for instance, something like this might happen. And white just cannot surround the black group. So that stone at R10 is helping black in this fight. So that's how he's hoping to use this stone to win the immediate fight in the local position. And white played a shoulder hit. So this shoulder hit is also related to the potential pressing move at Q15 that white wants to play. So for instance, if black were to play something passive here, maybe white would play the pressing move now. And those 2 white stones on the 4th line, they would be helping this to function for white in the case that black pushed through and cut. And black played the attachment. Black is going to build a wall in the top right corner, and thus white's group on the right side is going to be relatively weak, and black can fight there. So with a potential extension here, for instance, and sometimes the pressing move here, black has various ways to reinforce those 2 stones that black has on the right side. So this Joseki, it's still relevant. It's still a Joseki that can be played in modern Go. And actually, this is a point where white has two choices, and it's sort of hard to choose. So the way white played in the game, white is alive with Sente. So it's a good way to get Sente, especially if you have a move that you want to play. So white continued here. So white wanted to play this extension. So in that context, it made sense for white to play the Atari at S16 to get Sente so that white could get to R7 first. The other option, though, would be to go straight down. So for the time being, this is Gote. It gives black Sente. But black's outside wall is relatively weak. So if white gets to cut at P15, this requires white to have a ladder breaking move somewhere. But if white gets to cut at P15, that's going to be a very strong attack. Also, when black does things like this, it is relatively difficult, less satisfying for black to connect up on the side because of the peep at R14. And also, of course, white's corner territory is much better than it was in the game. So there's various reasons why white 1 can be a better move. And so, for instance, if we say something like this happens, at some point in the fight in the center, white is going to get a ladder breaking move, after which black probably has to defend the cut. So there's kind of a delayed Sente there for white, where black eventually will have to add a stone to the black wall to make it relatively strong. And white still has things like the peep at R14 or an attachment at Q14 to make trouble for black there. So the black wall is much weaker than it was in the game, making this also a viable variation. The drawback being that for the time being, black had Sente. So you have to consider that. So it's a difficult choice for human pros. This is probably typical of a no komi game because black is playing a bit too solid. If we were giving komi, black would probably play something a bit more active. So, for instance, a variation like this where black would be trying to play more actively, so black could continue here or could play away. By creating a strong group there in the lower right, black would be defending that 4-stone wall and would be trying to avoid the necessity of connecting up on the side. Okay, so in the game, black curled around. So the reason this would not be played always in a modern game is because the territory is relatively small. And by adding all these stones to the black position, there's a majority of black stones. So if we just look at this clump of stones, there's 5 black stones and only 4 white stones. That means that although white doesn't want to die, there is a reduced amount of responsibility in this white group. So there's the option of white discarding or neglecting that white group to a certain degree if white can get a positional advantage elsewhere on the board. Just because black has spent actually more moves on the right side than white has, it means that it's not really that white has invested stones there. It was an exchange. So white can afford to sacrifice it in some of the scenarios. It requires white to get something positive elsewhere, of course. So because of that, when black plays this way, it does put relatively less pressure on the white group because white can think of discarding it in some scenarios. Okay, so this is another interesting move. Since black has a very strong position in the top right, white probably doesn't want to be getting so close to it. So I'd say this move, maybe these 2 moves were the most questionable moves of this game, and they sort of reflect the opening theory of the time. So black probably should have taken the corner, and white would have extended to the right, probably, and then black could start playing away. So in this variation, those 2 white stones on the top side can become a liability to white because they're not completely alive yet, and black has potential splitting attacks where black would be capturing the 4 stones on the right. So that's how this would work for black, but black extended on the other side. So white got to play the corner, and black got the other corner. So white played a Sumari here. Playing a Kakari towards the lower left was also a big move. So white could have played... In modern Go, people like to play the 3-3 point here. So now white dived in here. And here. So this is interesting. An interesting Tetsuji where white... I think if black had played here, white would have played the Hane. And would be capturing a black stone here. So... And maybe something like this. So in this case, white would be living in the corner. And black would have to capture the white stone at 2. That would, so maybe, I'm not sure. Maybe we'll have white play here, and that would be alive. And black would end up having to capture that white stone in a net or something. So that was probably the idea with this, and black countered here. So if white tries the same idea here, now white cannot capture that black stone at e4. If white pushes through, black 8. So this is probably not so good for white because black can capture the white stones on the side. Or if white plays here, this is going to live, but it's going to be a bit painful. So if it's something like this, this would be a good result for black. Black has a very strong position on the outside. So instead, white wedged here. Okay, when white wedged, black cut underneath. White played an Atari and broke out, and they had this sequence. So I'm going to question the move order here because I think there might have been a scribe mistake. So these games were played 400 years ago. So over the centuries, the paper records of the games could deteriorate, and they were copied by scribes to preserve the records. Sometimes the scribes could make mistakes. So this is kind of ambiguous, which is makes it the type of mistake that is hard to catch. But this game sequence that we see here, it makes more sense if the two black moves are interchanged. So these two moves are 47 and 49. And I don't like 47 because it seems clear to me that white should have just extended. So if white extends, white is threatening to cut at a3. And the latter works. So this would be clearly better than the game variation. Very easy for white to execute, obviously. And from black's point of view, if black plays here, while the other variation was worrying for black, this one is, if white connects, it's not so worrying. So in this case, if white cuts here, white's liable to lose that group on the bottom side. So black's going to capture the white stones on the bottom side in this variation. White can actually escape if white starts with this. But if we say something like this, it's not a very good variation for white. So it would be something like this. Maybe black would invade on the left side then. So black has a very strong position towards the center, which aids this invasion. It's black can be satisfied with this result. So this is the easier move to play intuitively. And in the game, extending here would be relatively easy for white to play. So there's two moves that are hard to explain here. And it makes a lot more sense if they had played it in this move order, which would be, it seems to be a reasonable sequence for white also. So obviously I don't have any proof, but that's something that I'm guessing here. Okay, so white has established a strong group on the bottom side, and so the black stone in the lower right is in danger of being surrounded on a large scale. So it makes sense for black to play the attachment in the Hane. Very similar to sequences we see in modern Go. White connected and black played the hanging connection. So this is a sequence. It's very similar to what we would play nowadays. Okay, so black plays a capping move. Black is cutting off the white group on the right side. So black is cutting this group off and hoping to attack this group later. And so white is, this is the kind of the division line between the white Moyo and the black Moyo on the right side, the white Moyo on the left. So white is expanding white's Moyo, making it less valuable for black to capture those 4 white stones on the right side. So these 4 white stones, they are an issue, but it's more efficient for white to expand the Moyo because now it becomes less valuable for black to capture the 4 stones because there's less space attached to them. So black actually will have to invade white's area. So the shoulder hit, the perfect move. Obviously the way that black wants to invade white's area here. And then here. So when black plays at E13, black is looking at the attachment at H14. So an attachment here to cut white off. Also looking at this one and some potential aji in the top left corner, but primarily I think it's this attachment that white has to worry about. So that leads up to white's attachment here, where white is reinforcing the connection. So this actually reinforced both knight's moves because the stone here is interfering with black playing, let's see, where did white play? White played here. So it's interfering with black playing this move because the white stone at K16 is creating a problem for black there. Okay, so black caps white. So while escaping out into the center, black is making a threat against white's stones on the right. So if black gets to play another stone here, that would cut off these white stones on the right. And white jumped out, and black played here. White pushed through, and black bumped against white. So it was reasonable for white to extend here, and black covered. And now white jumped in. So this was necessary, because if white hadn't done that, black would have gotten some eye space. So if white had played here, then black would play here. In this position, it becomes difficult. So black sort of has a forcing move here, threatening to wedge at J14. So it becomes very difficult for white to take away black's eye space. So in order to attack this black group, white does have to take away black's eyes with this move. And in the sequence here, you see white forming a territory in the top left. So white is taking territory while taking away black's eye space. There was a moment here where white seemed to have an opportunity to cut at D12, and that would be bad. So let's look at that variation. If white cuts here, black is just going to fill liberties like this, and white has to cut, and then capture like this. It's probably good enough just to wedge here, and this would be cutting off the whole white group on the right, and it would be forcing on this side too. So black would have an extra move to do something like this and actually surround that white group. So this would be bad for white. It would be too much territory for black in the center. So white covered. So instead of doing that, white played here. In this case, if black pushes through, white gets to cut without that squeeze. So the best black can do is this way. And in this variation, wedging at J14 becomes Miai with white moving out somewhere in the center. So black's not going to capture very much in this variation. So black connected and white covered. So this completes the connection there in the center, and white's getting some extra territory in the top left while taking away black's eye space. Black jumps out. So this is still continuing to threaten white's group on the right. So just to list the groups that still have issues here, there's this white group, it was weak throughout the game. And for most of the game, it was not big enough for black to try to capture on a small scale. So if black can capture it while saving the group in the center, that would be super efficient. But otherwise, maybe black's not so interested in that white group. There's this white group, which is pretty much alive. So this white group, there's a move here, which would give white this shape here. When it looks like it's 8 points, a 2x4, it's generally going to be a living shape. Or if white plays a knight's move here, that would also give white about 8 points of territory on the side, which usually converts into a living shape. So this white group, for the time being, it's okay, but white does have to watch it a little bit. And then there's this black group, which if we allow white to play here, locally this is not a living shape. So if white plays these 2 points, black would have only one eye in the corner, and then black would have to have an extra eye in the center of the board. So black does have to remember that this group is not perfect. And of course, there's this black group, which is running out from the left. So there's 4 groups that are fairly weak. And also could be some issues with this white group on the left, which is, it's not connected to anything yet. So white peeped here. If black had connected, that would have been a good forcing move for white. So it was a tetsuji for black to play here. And for the time being, white cannot capture in a ladder. So white played a ladder breaking move. He covered on this side, and white got to capture in a ladder. So now the ladder works. But black did gain from that exchange of n6 for black 06. So black's gaining by getting some extra eye space for that black group in the lower right. And it's actually weakening white's group on the right side also. So there's some profit that black gained there. And black played here. So this was kind of typical of Santetsu in that he's a very strong fighting player. But did complicate things maybe a bit more than necessary because black was still winning at this point. So if black had played something relatively simple, maybe something like this, this would give black an eye in the center, and this group is obviously going to connect out to some other black groups. So this black group is fairly safe, and black did have a small lead in territory, so a few points in this no komi game. So in the game, black is playing more aggressively and played here. White has to find a strong counterattack. So white bumped against black here and connected here. So this was another opportunity for black to back out of the fight. Something like this would be a relatively close game. Yes, so something like this. Black's group in the center is relatively safe now, and it would be a question of the territory. So it would be a difficult endgame. But in the game, black goes after these white stones. This was a tetsuji, where white is sort of squeezing to cut the black group off. Okay. So white has played a bamboo joint here, trying to connect up to the group in the lower right. Black's group in the center is starting to look isolated, and it doesn't have 2 eyes yet. So black played here and here. This move actually succeeds in cutting white off and capturing the white group in the center. And I say that, but it's probably the losing move also. So just to show you the other variation, black should have probably played here. And this would give black 1 eye in the center, which means that if black gets to play at this point, it becomes really difficult for white to continue attacking. So black's 1 step closer to getting a living shape. And white does have to improve the connection here. So white's going to play here. And like this. Something like this. So at this point, black has created a living shape for the group in the lower right. And the whole question is what happens with the center? And it's undecided. So white can take away an extra potential eye there at 14. So black has just 1 eye in the center, but the white group is really weak also. So if we imagine something like this happening, stuff like this happening, white does have a lot of issues to deal with. So maybe something like this. Oh yes, maybe like this. This is an example of a bad variation for white. So in this variation, the white group would die. Black would win the semi. So it's dangerous for the white group on the left also. In the game, black just captured the white group, so it should be good, but actually this was the losing move. White pushed through and cut and played an Atari here. So white could not immediately go after the 2 black stones because black would push through here and capture these white stones. So here, here, it doesn't really matter. Black's going to win the semi and capture these cutting stones, which means black will also capture these stones and these stones too. It doesn't really matter, but black's going to kill all of them. So that was bad for white. But it turns out when white plays here, if black answers that, now white can play here. And this time it's going to work. So in this case, the white group, it has 5 liberties. So black can push through here, but there's 3 liberties here and 2 liberties here. So 5 liberties, and black has only 4 liberties. So white's going to win this one. So black had to defend in the center. So white has 3 liberties left. And this was the final decisive squeeze. So white could have played here. And this would still cut off black's group in the lower right corner. It would have a lot of bad aji associated with it. So even something like this. So if a variation is something like this, we can imagine black squeezing white to a certain degree. And it would be a semi instead of white just capturing black outright. So in this case, the trade of white's group in the center for black's group in the lower right would be relatively even, and the game would be undecided. However, white didn't squeeze that way. White squeezed. Allowing a double Atari here was a very clever way to squeeze. So black saved some of the stones, but in this variation, white's capture of the black group in the lower right is very secure, which means that black doesn't have any forcing moves against white in this variation. So at this point, white took the lead. Black pushes through here. They're still continuing to show some very exciting tetsuji here. This is a move that black was aiming to play. This hane underneath that was played probably about 40-50 moves ago. He was aiming to push through at e14. So there's a connection there because there's the cut on the third line here. So this was a relatively simple way for black to make use of that bad aji there in the corner. So in this variation, white is making a threat against black on the left side, and black answered here. So if black had not done that, then white would be able to play down here and then cut. So it's important to play 2, because if white just plays here, then black's going to be able to live on the side. So white plays down on the first line here to take away black's eyes. So white can capture the 5 black stones in the corner. So they're continuing with an endgame. At this point, the game starts to look like it's a secure win for white. So we'll just go through the endgame. This was a clever play by black. If black had played here, this would have been a forcing move. And white would have played the endgame with sente. So this would be a forcing sequence for white. By playing here, it's no longer forcing. And if white leaves it, black can play here and kill the white group. This would kill the white group. So white had to answer that, and black got to take sente. So that was a clever tetsuji there. Covering at g2, that was a very big move. So that was probably the final decisive move, which gave white a safe lead in this game. Okay, what black is doing here is black is saving the 4 stones. So until black captures the white stones in the center, these 4 black stones are in danger of being captured. So that was an 8-point move. This was a exquisite Tetsuji, where black's territory is not going to get any bigger, but white is going to be able to squeeze from the outside. So white cuts there. It doesn't actually expand the black territory, but white did get G1 and F6. And it's just Atari's forcing moves to the end. And they finished the game. White won by 7 points. So that's it for this video. I'll be continuing with some other prominent players during the golden era of Go. So thank you for watching.